The easiest way to spot a bar raiser in an Amazon interview is by looking at the seniority. Usually they're the most senior person interviewing you. Also, another reliable way to spot the bar raiser is that they will not be part of your future team. Also, occasionally you'll have two people in the bar raiser interview, one being the shadow. Okay, now what's so interesting about these bar raisers? Well, it's interesting because people who interview candidates and evaluate candidates a lot can read them also far better. So my first tip for you would be to limit the amount of bluffing, especially with the bar raiser and particularly in your elevator pitch. For example, not too long ago, I had a client who booked a few coaching sessions with me, and their request was pretty peculiar in the sense that they had failed an Amazon interview as of recently. However, they recorded their loop and they asked me to listen to that and provide them with feedback. And one of their interviews with the bar raiser, they basically started with the elevator pitch and they bluffed on some very important metric. And this caught the attention of the bar raiser, and they actually went after the candidate for the remainder of their job interview. So luckily they did pass the second time they interviewed with Amazon. But long story short, limit amount of bluffing, especially with the bar raisers, being the first tip. The second thing that you should understand about bar raisers, it's their job to interview as good as possible. So they might come up with questions that you'll hear for the first time. For example, let me give you a question which you probably have never heard before in a job interview. How do you use AI at work? Okay, so can you answer this interview question? Or another more common scenario of questions we hear for the first time is not because the question itself is new, but the way they reframed it make it sound counterintuitive. For example, how would you handle conflict inside your future team? Okay, so if I'd ask you to tell me about the time when you had a conflict with your manager, that would be pretty obvious. You know, it's an earned trust question, but when you open it and make that hypothetical, it's slightly more counterintuitive to spot. So what's the fix here? How can you improve your chances to answer these rather difficult questions? Well, in my training program, I have implemented some quizzes, some assessments to basically give you some questions and then ask you, hey, which leadership principle is this? And you'll be surprised about the amount of candidates who tell me that I'm an expert with these things. I don't need quizzes, I don't need assessments. But when they do take these tests, the average is somewhere around 66% of the time. Okay, imagine yourself preparing 1 month your story bank, and then during the interview, they ask you a question that you don't know how to answer because you don't know which leadership principle that is, right? So building your listening skills is also something that pays off big time in job interviews. Okay, another important aspect of a bar raiser interview is that they will likely ask you the most follow-up and challenge questions, simply because they represent in a way the Amazon's culture, so they want to ensure that you're a great fit for that role. And the solution here, how do you prevent a ton of follow-up and challenge questions, is to prepare them in advance. So there is the STAR worksheet, which I'll also put on the screen right now, that presents you the follow-up and challenge questions that they have. You know, so this is an Amazon document that presents you all possible options. And what you could do would be to ideally embed all these follow-up and challenge questions in your original answers. So this is why giving rather long, convincing first answers tends to have the best interview outcomes, right? So prepare using the STAR worksheet. And finally, they might interview you slightly differently. Okay, so because bar raisers have these skills, of interviewing people all the time, they might do something different to not make it such a templated experience, so to speak. So one thing they might do would be to go through all the leadership principles twice during one go. Okay, so they would challenge you to answer quickly all their questions so they can see how you would react, what type of answers you would give. This would be primarily, for senior advisory roles and roles where communication should be a strength, right? Another thing they could do, which I just presented you earlier in the video, would be to, when you give your elevator speech, they could dive deeper from there and challenge you or ask you to develop, ask you to talk more about one of your program or projects or experiences, simply because, they would want to understand your expertise or your fit into a certain leadership principle. Right, so going on a deep dive for an elevator speech would be the second way they would run this interview in a more peculiar way. Okay, and lastly, but certainly not least, how do you pass Amazon interviews? How do you pass the Amazon bar raiser interview, so to speak? And if you'll ask Amazonians or ex-Amazonians, the solution would almost always be that you have to prepare stories on all those 16 leadership principles and do some role play, and that would be the ideal formula for success. Now, in my experience, after doing this since 2019, this solution is a rather cumbersome, a rather complicated one. You should also understand that Amazon didn't always have 16 leadership principles. They started with 12, I think. So if this approach of preparing all the possible leadership principles worked in the past, nowadays I know that very few people have the time to invest into preparing so much content for their job interview. So that's why in my training programs I offer both this solution of preparing all leadership principles, but I have a second training program which is a simplified version of those leadership principles into some core behaviors that will enable you to speed up your interview process and to more quickly come with a story bank that you could role play. So there's only two things you need to pass an Amazon interview, that is your story bank and some role play, ideally intercombined. And I actually have people who've had a lot of success with this, including a very interesting story of one of my clients who used to lead the Amazon bar raiser program, and they wanted to transition to another company. And during our coaching session, she told me that, hey Dan, you know what? I've never used to prepare on Amazon's leadership principle when I joined Amazon. It was actually from one of your videos that I learned about those principles only after I got hired. So long story short, there's plenty of ways to pass this behavior interview. There's many shortcuts that you might take while still have a comprehensive approach of preparing both a story bank and to role play that for your purpose of a job interviews. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.